This is episode 3 of Tuesday TJ Talk. Today is going to be all about manual transmission. So if your TJ is a 5-speed or a 6-speed, you're going to want to stick around because this episode probably applies to you. So before we get started into talking all about manual versus automatic, I hope you guys are enjoying the Windrock footage. We just got back. I'm filming this a couple days after we got back from a 3-day run up to Windrock Park in Tennessee. It's probably our favorite place to go. I wouldn't say it's our favorite all-time park. They've got some amazing trails. The park's just a little bit too spread out for me as far as, ranking it my number 1 in the entire Southeast, but it's hard to beat the views there. Walden's Ridge has been live for a while now, and later this week, the Trail 15 and 16 video is coming out. Those are our favorites. Those are probably the most famous trails at the park, and we love running them. So just want to throw that out there. Hope you guys are enjoying the Windrock content, and there will be more to come for sure. So to today's topic, manual transmissions. That's probably one of the most asked topics that I get asked about on our forum, just in general when we're on the trail. Hey, how is it wheeling a 5-speed? And the answer is not easy, but I've been wheeling a manual or driving a manual since I was 15 years old. So I'm just kind of used to it by this point. If you're a Jeep owner, you are tasked with, at least back in the day when TJs came out, choosing between a manual transmission or an automatic transmission. In case you just were born yesterday and don't realize the difference, a manual is literally what it sounds like. You shift on your own at the shift points you want. There's a clutch, there's a brake, there's a gas pedal. For you really young people watching, you probably have never even seen one of these. But back in the day, probably the majority of vehicles were a stick shift, aka manual. The TJ was offered from 97 to 06. It had several different versions of the manual transmission. Probably the best one you could get was the 6-speed. Not necessarily from a toughness standpoint, but from the first gear that came in those is really, really low. As you may know, low gearing on the trail helps. Hence why we spent $2,000 to put a 241 Rubicon case in our Jeep. So AX15 came in them from, I believe, 97 to 2002 in the 4 liters. And then it switched from a 5-speed AX15 to another 5-speed, but this one is the NV3550 that was offered from 03 to 04, and that's what ours is. So we've got a NV3550 5-speed, and then 05 and 06 are the ones that switched to a 6-speed. And I don't have the name of that one off memory. I believe it's the NSG something like 370. But that was a solid transmission. None of them were known for being super unreliable, but the AX15 was pretty tough. A lot of people end up, if their NV3550 craps out, they will just go with an AX15. I believe they're just a little tougher. But those are the 3 manual transmissions that were offered in a 4-liter Jeep such as ours from 97 to 06. So when we went to buy our TJ, I've driven manual since I was 15 years old. It's my preference, especially on the street. If you listen to episode 1 or 2 when we talked about how we acquired our TJ in the first place, we weren't planning to do the type of wheeling where you need an automatic. We've kind of gotten to that point now. Rattle Rock at Windrock is a perfect example That video will be coming out very soon. But this gets into the meat of what we want to talk about today. How is wheeling a manual transmission on the trail? If you're hitting mild stuff, it's fine. The harder you get, rock piles, steep hills, trying to stop mid-hill and bump up an undercut or something's probably the hardest. So pretty much if you are new to Jeeping and off-roading and want to dive into the real technical stuff like we've been hitting in our recent videos, I would honestly recommend an automatic. It just takes one layer of complexity out of the situation because you've got one brake pedal and one gas pedal to deal with versus trying to ride the clutch and get going. So we chose a manual because, like I said before in episode 1 and 2, we did not plan on doing near the complexity of stuff that we're doing now. And we're making it work. But everybody always asks me, if you go back and had a redo, would you buy a manual again? And as much as I love my manual, if I were to do it all over again and I knew I was building a rock crawler, I would buy an automatic. It just, you'll see in the Rattle Rock video, it adds so much complexity to if you're trying to bump up undercuts, if you're trying to crawl over boulders. Britt was right behind me in an automatic LJ, and his run through Rattle Rock looked so much cleaner than mine just because I have the clutch to deal with. And even with the 4-to-1 transmission, it's not quite low enough to where it's pretty to watch, I guess. The 4-to-1 made a huge difference. And I told Ryan as I was halfway through Rattle Rock, I said, man, this is the first time that I can noticeably tell I'm still under geared. But you have to remember that is probably the hardest trail at Windrock. At least it has that reputation. So if we're running that type stuff and I'm still in a 5-speed on 37s, this just is what it is. You know, it's not the Jeep's fault. I did not intend on running that type stuff when we first built this thing. So as fun as driving a manual is, if I had to go back today and buy another Jeep that I knew that I would be strictly rock crawling in, no street time or anything, I'd probably buy an automatic. That being said, do I plan on transmission swapping mine? No. It's kind of fun. As much as it causes a headache on crazy obstacles like that, I really do enjoy the 5-speed. Not trying to sound unhumble or brag or anything, but I've been doing this a long time. I feel like certain things, if I switched to an automatic, it would almost be too easy. I'm so used to having a gear selector to deal with, a clutch to deal with, wondering where my RPMs are, just the whole act of trying to balance driving a 5-speed and getting over extreme obstacles like that, that I truly have come to enjoy it. It may not make the prettiest video. People may be wondering, what the heck is that guy's problem? Why is he rolling back? Or why is he bouncing so hard? Or why is he having to rev it up so high to get going? It's just part of driving a 5-speed. But as I hope you can tell, if you go back and watch pre-Rubicon transfer case versus post-Rubicon transfer case videos, that made a huge difference. I mean, that's probably the best thing we've done to this Jeep. For me to stall at this point, I have to be truly on a like 3 or 4 foot undercut and just nudge the Jeep into it and let it stall itself. If I'm crawling up any sort of hill, or if I'm on a rock, a big boulder or anything, it's really hard to stall it. Like, you've got to try to stall it. And that's due to the Rubicon case, because I used to get on more technical stuff, even like Rock Creek at Stony and all that, and I would stall all the time. And I was like, well, crap. Well, that's because I was on 456 gears with a 231 trying to get a manual transmission through those trails. But the synopsis, I guess, of my wheeling experience with a manual, it's worth it. To me, a manual is Jeep. I know that sounds funny because probably 90% of Jeeps rolling off the line these days are automatics. But like we've talked about before, I'm a 90s kid. In the 90s, I bet 90% of Jeeps were manuals. Automatics were really just getting popular in sport vehicles like that because everybody used to want the stick shift. So it's just kind of something cool to me about being on the trail in a manual and running trails that a lot of people wouldn't even think about trying in a manual transmission. So the big question, I guess, do I regret getting a manual? No. I love it. I love having my stick. But if I could go back and start from nothing, knowing that all I was going to be doing was level 5 double black diamond rock crawling trails, I would probably err for the automatic just for ease of, you know, making it look pretty. Not that I want an automatic. Like I said, I'm not planning on transmission swapping mine. I love my manual, but something about having the auto, it just seems like it would allow you to do more. And I hate to say gearing doesn't matter as much because it always matters having the right gear set and the transfer case and all that kind of stuff. But if you've got the ability to kind of feather the brake, feather the gas, not have to worry about the clutch, it just kind of takes the need for perfect gearing to me out of the equation. So I love my manual, but if I had to go back and do it again, I would do an automatic. But NV3550 is fine. As you see in the videos, at least I hope you can see, we do just fine with the manual. And it's, like I said, it's cool. You know, somebody walks up and we're midway up an obstacle and they're like, man, he's in a 5-speed. That's pretty cool. You just don't see it much anymore other than TJs really and CJs. I guess YJs too, but I'm not a YJ fan. We may do an episode on that. But yeah, like Thomas on the Walden's Ridge Trail, he's got an 85, I think it is, 84, 85 CJ7. And he and I were the only 5-speeds on that trip out of, I think, 13 or 14 rigs. And there's just something to be said for being in a manual. You know, it doesn't look as pretty, it doesn't sound as pretty, but the fact that people are still out there wheeling them and people are getting those things up the same obstacles that automatics take on, it's just kind of cool. So no, we're not swapping out our manual, even though if I had to go back and do it again, I'd pick an auto. So any advice that I can give for current manual drivers that want to go off-road, start simple, get a feel for it, start on easier trails, don't go right for the hard stuff. Every clutch is different, every transmission, the feel is different based off the age, how worn it is, things like that. So just start slow. You'll learn your vehicle, you'll learn what your clutch feels like, where your release point is. And yeah, I honestly recommend everybody trying a manual off-road because it's just, like I said, it's something nostalgic about it to me. It makes it just one step cooler to me to be out there in a manual. So don't be scared of a manual. If you're looking for a used Jeep and you see a manual and you're like, oh crap, I don't want to deal with that, it's not that bad. If you've driven a manual before, you'll be fine. Now, do I recommend going, if you want to go off-road, do I recommend going and buying a 5 or 6 speed Jeep to build as a rock crawler? No. That's just one step that you don't want to have to deal with. But if you've been driving manual for 15 years like I have, there's nothing to it. Like I mentioned, we don't make it look the prettiest. It doesn't usually sound the prettiest unless you've got some 5-to-1 Atlas and 538 gears and literally just cannot stall and don't have to rev the RPMs up or anything. But it's cool. It's a manual. It's a Jeep. To me, that is what Jeep is. And you probably knew this was going to be my answer, but there's no way that I would ever get rid of my manual transmission. So this was a little shorter episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed getting our opinion on manual versus automatic. To me, automatic wins any day on some technical trails as far as ease of driving. But manual, there's just something cool about it that you can't get in an automatic. So that's my opinion. Everybody's going to have their own, obviously. Probably 90% of people out there riding these trails that we do are in automatics, and that's okay. I have nothing against the automatic. I just like that there's still some manuals out there, and that I get to be one of those guys that's still in an old school 5-speed. So that's our opinion on manual transmissions in the woods. Like I said, don't be scared of them. However, if you've never driven a manual and you're looking for a woods rig, I would look for an automatic. It's just not worth trying to learn stick and trying to learn to off-road at the same time. But if you've been doing this for a long time like me, go for it. It's cool. I can't recommend it enough, to be honest with you. It's just another layer of stuff you have to think about out there, and you really have full 100% control of your vehicle, which is so cool to me. So again, that's my opinion. This is a shorter episode. I know we're running about 18 minutes or so right now. Hope you've enjoyed the new podcast episode all about manual transmissions. I also hope you're enjoying our whole podcast series. If you haven't seen episode 1 or 2, please go back and rewatch those. It kind of talks about the history of the channel. We did a deep dive on my Jeep in the episode 2, the last episode. Again, this has been Tuesday TJ Talk. I'm Ethan. This is Everyday Off-Road. We've got more Windrock footage coming out, so you aren't going to want to miss that. Stick around. Thank you guys so much for your support and watching the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.